Yeah, here we are. So, good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to start with words of gratitude. I want to thank the American Embassy in Ukraine for supporting our projects. I want to say thank you to Allah and Michael for agreeing in participating in this project and for giving this lecture. And of course, we are really grateful to Spanish Fulbright Alumni Association for long cooperation and for all that has been already done and what is going to be done later. And I want to thank Spanish people and Spain as a country for permanent support of Ukraine, for all you do, and just it's really precious for us. And I want to thank Ukrainian defenders for the opportunity to conduct this lecture, to invite our guests and to join this lecture online, as well as all the other events we held. So thank you, everyone. Allah, Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Oksana. And I think it's really a great idea to start with gratitude. Because, well, I strongly believe that we can get more only when we are sincerely grateful for what we have, and we have really a lot. So that's why I also start with expressing my heartfelt gratitude to the international Fulbright community, namely its Spanish, American, and of course, Ukrainian branches, for organizing this event and of course, for its commitment to promoting peace and cultural exchange. Well, this is exactly how I understood my mission as a finalist of Fulbright Senior Scholar Program back in Kiev in 2012. We are the ambassadors of peace and cultural exchange. Well, I guess that's one of the fields of human endeavor that is most conducive to cultural exchange is translation. So literary translation in particular, which we are proud to represent today. We literary translators are not just invisible imitators. We are image makers of the source text author and of the culture he or she represents. We are driven by a constant need of getting into the shoes of the reader. And therefore, very often we become shoemakers and we model the reception of the source text. So I think that it is really very fascinating. Well, moreover, despite being the art of failure, just like Umberto Eco mentioned, translation is an art of doing things with words. And it's about bringing and bridging gaps between cultures and minds. And in order to bridge a gap, of course, you need a team. I must say that I'm really very grateful to have been on the same team with the world famous translator, Michael Naidan, so who will join our discussion shortly. And our prolific cooperation started more than 10 years ago when I came to Penn State University, and Michael was my supervisor. It seems to me that I was his 37th of 38 Fulbright he received. So, and I was really very proud to be one of them. And since then, we've successfully completed lots of translation projects. We participated in many congresses, conferences, and when I worked in Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev, Michael often came to the university, met my students, gave talks, conducted lectures. So our cooperation has always been very, very prolific. And probably the most recent projects that we worked on are, well, first of all, the book of, well, that's probably the freshest, the book of the war essays by prominent and probably not that very prominent, but still outstanding Ukrainian authors. Also, well, one of the bestsellers, I think, so the book by a Ukrainian journalist, Serhiy Rudenko, so Zelensky biography. And well, last year we worked on Yuri Winnichuk's novel A Night Reporter. Sometimes I wonder whether we pick a book or a book picks us for translation. Because interestingly, that despite being a captivating blend of a detective story, a thriller, romance with elements of Black humor, the events of The Night Reporter take place in 1938 in Lviv, when the World War II was already in the air. When we were working on this book, Russian aggression was already in the air. And of course, at that moment, when I was translating, I kind of felt this atmosphere, the war hovering above me. I couldn't have imagined that just within 6 months, something might occur again on my land. So, irrespective of the circumstances and coincidences, we see our mission in promoting Ukraine's visibility in the world and approaching its victory with every word, because in the beginning was the word and we know it. So therefore today we will speak about our humble contribution to interpreting Ukrainian culture before, during, and after Russian aggression. By the way, I used the phrase Russian aggression on purpose. I remember probably a couple of weeks ago, I saw a program here in Spain. I'm based in Spain now. Two young journalists, Ukrainian journalists who are based in Spain too, were interviewed, and they said that they do not accept the way the events are presented in the world. They speak about the war in Ukraine. But I think that we have to speak about Russian aggression, because when the war is in Ukraine, Ukraine becomes kind of not guilty, but kind of fault, but is presented in this wording. So therefore, I say before, during, and after the war, after Russian aggression. So let's start with before. I remember one of my first classes of Spanish at the official language school here in Barcelona 3 years ago. At that point, I couldn't say a lot of things in Spanish. And I remember our class, our teacher, made us think about stereotypes. So we were a group of international students, so maybe representatives of 15 countries. And each of us had to come up with some association. Well, I'm sure that if we had to do the same now, the list of associations with Ukraine would be really, really very long. But at that point, it included only 3 words. The first one was Chernobyl. The second one was borscht, and thanks to a girl from Polish, so she knew that borscht is Ukrainian soup. And Shevchenko, but the football player. So why do I say the football player? Well, that's something like Ukrainian Messi, right? At that point, people didn't know much about Shevchenko Taras, so the most prominent Ukrainian poet, whose works, by the way, Michael has translated into English, and I was really very happy and proud to be the editor. So I think that now Michael will tell you more about interpretation of Ukrainian culture before Russian aggression. Please, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much for your kind invitation. It's one of the paradoxes of this awful invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been Putin's idea was to destroy Ukrainian identity, to wipe it out, to not recognize it. And the opposite actually has occurred. More and more people, like this forum here today, and more people around the world want to know about Ukrainian culture. And there has been a tremendous amount of new publications, a whole bunch of new translators, and not just on wartime material, but also of the kind of Ukrainian cultural artifacts that those of us in Ukrainian studies have considered to be really great for a long time. but now it's easier to share that with the world. So that's one of the reasons why I got into translation studies and translating, practical translation, because there wasn't a lot out there in the 1970s when I started. And so I wanted to help promote what I saw as the best of Ukrainian culture. And I'm going to send you a link to an article that I published in World Literature Today for those of you who aren't familiar with Ukrainian culture, who want to get familiar with it. And these are English language publications, not just by me, but by many other authors too. So I'll send you the link to that if you'd like to look at that. And I'm also going to share the screen. Okay, there, that should do it. And this article, which is basically a primer into introducing people, who read English into Ukrainian culture. Now, the one thing that I point out, these are different covers that the publishers there decided to use. This is the other Shevchenko, and he's the main Shevchenko. You do not understand Ukrainian culture without at least getting some kind of idea about Taras Shevchenko, the great Ukrainian bard from the 19th century. And I have said elsewhere that the Ukrainian nation, the Ukrainian people, as we know them today, as we know it today, would not exist without Taras Shevchenko, because he really captured the embodiment of the Ukrainian struggle for freedom and identity. And through the Ukrainian past, through Ukrainian Cossacks, Kozake, and he sings a lot about in his poetry about the losses that the Ukrainian Cossacks experienced. He also shows that that is the path of heroism, and that is the future of Ukraine. Begins in that past. Besides, there's Peter Fedinsky did a complete works of Taras Shevchenko, which is the most recent edition of that. That's with Glagoslav Publishers. There are a whole bunch of anthologies of Ukrainian literature. One of them is this Her Stories that I did. It's a really great collection of really prominent Ukrainian women authors. I compiled the collection and I translated part of it. Alla translated several things in that too. And there are many more of these kinds of anthologies that are available. And so if you want to get into the new Ukrainian women writers, most of the new, most important ones are going to be there in shortened form, but available. There's a really nice anthology that Marko Andreychik did, Mark Andreychik, called The White Chalk of Days, which I did about 25% of the translations for that. That was reprinted by Penguin Publishers in a new title, and that's the new volume. So, and a print run of something like 20,000. It's called Writing from Ukraine, Fiction, Poetry, and Essays since 1965. So a lot of the most prominent Ukrainian authors are going to be in that. And there are a few other ones here, and I won't go into detail in those. But in terms of individual authors, there's much more available now than was available before. The most prominent Ukrainian authors, and they're not listed here in any particular order, but Yuri Andrukhovich, my personal favorite and a really close friend of mine. I translated his novel Perversion, spelled with a Z in the English translation, which is an absolutely brilliant novel. And it's one of the most difficult things that I ever translated it. And I was only able to translate it by working with Yuri very closely. And it is a multi-voiced work. And I compare it a lot to James Joyce's Ulysses. And it's all different kinds of voices. And I had to use For example, I translated part of it into Jamaican English, and I'll give you a little example of that. And with Guan to the radiance of the great floating fish to the king scatter with blood, make the lightning strike them, make the lightning strike them. So with the help of a Jamaican friend of mine, Michael Houghton, I translated one chapter into authentic Jamaican English. And he has these other novels translated by other people, Recreations, 12 Circles, the Muscovy. Those are all available in English. And I'll point it out that, like, when we decide to translate something, it tends to find us. And I also present that in a different kind of way. I say that I fall in love with the work. And if I begin reading a work and it just really grabs my soul and spirit, and it's saying, translate me, you need to translate me. And that's what happened with Andruchovich's Perversion. And that's also what happened with Maria Matios's Solotka Darusha, Sweet Darusha, which I subtitled as A Tale of Two Villages. Both of those authors, by the way, and are represented in their articles that came out in the New York Review of Books and the Toronto Globe and several other periodicals in the world as one of the top 10 works to really get a great, you need to read to get a great understanding of Ukrainian literature. So, and Sweet Darusha really encapsulates the tragedy of Ukrainian history from the 1930s, a Ukraine that's caught between Romanian forces, Polish forces, Nazi forces, Red Army forces, and the suffering of the people who suffers because of that. And that novel really does capture that quite a bit. Another one that Alla mentioned was Yuri Vinichuk, whom we both really love as a stylist, a brilliant writer. I do highly recommend his Tango of Death, Tango Smerti, which is also about World War II in Ukraine with a little bit of a metaphysical plot. It's a fantastic work. And probably the most popular Ukrainian writer right now is Serhiy Zhadan. And Zhadan's works are, a lot of them are about Eastern Ukraine, Kharkiv and those areas that are been under attack in the war that was going on from 2014 till this current war. And he also is a poet, and Yale University Press published a collection of his poetry. I haven't translated his prose personally, but other people have done a good job of that. And he mostly writes about the post-Soviet industrial wasteland that encompasses parts of Eastern Ukraine. So a lot of that is available now. And if you go to this site, you can click on these and get links to those works. Oksana Zabushko is the top Ukrainian feminist writer right now working. I started translating her poetry early on. I translated a little bit of her prose. She's best known for field work in Ukrainian sex, which the idea came to her while she was visiting here at Penn State University. We had invited a Ukrainian artist, Mykola Kumanovsky, over, and they had an affair that went sour, and she ended up writing this diatribe about it against Kumanovsky and from a feminist point of view. And it's also a work about Ukrainian identity as much as it is about sex. And it became one of Ukraine's first bestsellers and has been translated by Helena Herein into English, Museum of Abandoned Secrets, and others of her poetry have also been published. Natalka Bielitsarkevich is another poet whom I know personally quite well. I published a collection of her works with 8 different translators, and also another volume of her poetry in translation was done by Lost Horse Press, and that was an award-winning volume for that. Oleg Lisheha, another major poet, who is quite a character. He's kind of like a Walt Whitman, and a guy who likes to just take long hikes through the woods and picking up little twigs, picking up little stones and making sculptures. My colleague here, James Brassfield at Penn State, got to know him really well and co-translated his works. And that volume that they did, the selected poems of Oleg Lisheha, won a very big American award here. And the presentation of the award to him and to James Brassfield for that, they had an audience of $4,000, 4,000 people at a hall in, well, I'm trying to remember the name of the hall. It's at 66th Street in New York City. But so that was a really big deal because it was the first time a Ukrainian author had received that award, a translator had received for Ukrainian poetry. Lina Kostenko is an author that I work on quite a bit. Translated 2 books of her poetry. She's the grande dame of Ukrainian poetry. And also, I mentioned a whole bunch of other things if you want to become acquainted with Ukraine, and this kind of transitions into what's going on now. This Oksana Maximchuk and Max Rosochinsky, they edited and co-translated this volume of Words for War, new poems from Ukraine. I did a couple volumes, a couple poems for that volume. This is a book that just came out. It arrived yesterday. And it's a book called In the Hour of War, Poetry from Ukraine. And it's by Arrowsmith Publishers. And it is edited by Carolyn Forche and Ilya Kaminsky, who were 2 very well-known American poets who did this volume. I included a couple of my translations in that just became available. There are lots of essays that are really good. For example, My Final Territory that I did with Marko Andrejczyk. And you might notice I mention other people's names often when I talk about my translations because I do collaborative translations. I loved working with a native speaker whom I get along with, well with. And Alla in particular, I've been working very closely with her. We've done 5 or 6 books that she's either edited or co-translated with me. So a lot of these things are available. And if you go to this site, that essay, that's a book of Yuri Andruchovich's essays, which his essays are focused on how Ukraine is really truly a European nation and how Halachina, Galicia, Western Ukraine. And of course, you have a Galicia in Spain too. I love the music, by the way, from Galicia. There was a Galician group called Miladoro, who had come from there and performed in the United States quite a bit. And I was fortunate enough to see them. So that book of essays really shows you the Ukrainian mentality, and that Alla is going to talk about more of the other essays and the other things you can look at. And I just wanted to show you very briefly, I'm going to run through these really fast, but I just wanted to show you some of the book covers that I particularly am really happy, let's see, to work with artists. I also like to present a lot of Ukrainian artists. And, I'm just going to run through some of these. For example, this wonderful cover by Ivan Marchuk for From 3 Worlds that a whole bunch of us published. The names are all listed there of the various editors. It's the first anthology of contemporary Ukrainian prose and poetry in the 1990s, that modern period. This book, very significant in terms of collaboration with Olha Luchuk, and this is really the standard bilingual edition of Ukrainian poetry that's out there. And it was fantastic working with Olya. She was really very precise and kept me in check all the time. Alla is able to do that with me too, to keep me from straying too much. And just like one or two, this is a wonderful cover design by Lviv artist Yurko Koch. And the illustrations inside this book are absolutely magnificent. And I can't show them now, and I don't have enough time. But this is a wonderful painting that I use for the cover design of the essential poetry of Bohdan Ihor Antonich. And this is based on one of Antonich's poems. This is a Mykola Kumanovsky artwork. He's the hero of Oksana Zabushko's Ukrainian fieldwork and Ukrainian sex, or the anti-hero, I guess we should say. But, and yeah, there's one more that in particular I wanted to show you. This one by Oksana Jalisko. She's a Ukrainian artist from Lviv who now lives in Western Canada. This is exquisite series of paintings. She had a different woman for each month, and this was the month of April. I managed to see her work at an exhibit in Canada. I also do some Ukrainian children's books, bilingual Ukrainian children's books that are done by great artists. This is Mykola Kumanovsky. This is a Ukrainian pisanke. It's an exquisite painting of his that he did while he was here as a visitor. So, and you know, I love including these different artists, and I also work very closely with Blagoslav publishers on several editions, and their designer there, Max Mender, terrific designer of book covers. So I do think, even though they say you can't judge a book by the covers, by the cover, I think people do. And if you have a nice cover, it shares that artistic vision, and also opens up that book to attract readers. So that's all I'll show you of this and have to say at this point. I think I've said probably too much, but I'll let take over.
Yeah, Michael, thank you very much. And thank you for this particular last cover, because I do remember, so that was probably my last year of work at Shevchenko University in Kiev. And I carried out an experiment, so based on the reception theory of literary translation. And when my students were reading your translation, your and Ole's translation of The Tango of Death. So first they read the book in your translation, and they spoke about their perception of translation, and then they read the original, and they compared their perception of the original and the translation. But I remember so that the book was still in the process to be published, and you sent us couple covers, and you asked my students to participate in the decision making. And it seems to me that this is exactly the cover that my students preferred, and they expressed their feelings. They thought that this particular cover reflects what is there. So, well, the idea of the author. So thank you. Well, Michael has mentioned quite a few names, many of which probably our Spanish colleagues haven't heard of. However, they are particularly important, essential now, when the Russification of Ukrainian cities is in full swing. I mean, renaming streets, squares, and lots of public places named after this or that Russian writer, poet. You know, before the war, I would say that I was a little bit cautious about all these processes of renaming, all these processes of ruining monuments. Well, I remember a couple years ago, well, when I read an article about the monument of Cervantes being, well, dismantled somewhere in the United States, I thought, well, poor Cervantes, what did he have to do with, well, what's going on here? So maybe sometimes we just have to keep the monument and just rename it. So this is the monument of our ignorance. So, well, maybe at some point this person was important. Now we have reconsidered, but who knows? Well, the future will show. So, well, the truth. But this idea of renaming is the subject matter of one of the essays, of the war essays that we translated. So I'm going to share my screen. And yeah. So this is it, and you will have a chance to get some quotes. Am I sharing? Is everything fine? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, everything's
Okay.
fine.
Yes, everything's fine. I'm sorry. Yeah. So, well, this is an excerpt from one of the essays by Yuri Andruchovich. We prepared for publication with Penguin Books. And in this particular essay, which is called Why Ilyich? So Andruchovich contemplates on a pretty controversial issue of renaming Tchaikovsky National Music Academy of Ukraine, and actually provides 3 reasons for it. So, well, the first reason is that the then Kiev Conservatory received the name of Tchaikovsky in 1940, on the centenary of the composer's birth. And well, the author thinks that it really bears a sign of an obvious legacy of Stalinism. The second reason, well, actually, I didn't think about that, but this is true. So that very often the name of Tchaikovsky was associated with the Soviet cultural policy. And really, I remember my childhood. So when Tchaikovsky Swan Lake, well, was shown during 2 days of the August Putsch. So when the Soviet Union strove to renew its state of emergency. So by association of ideas, the preservation of Tchaikovsky's name may indicate, well, the desire to preserve the Soviet culturally political paradigm. But the third reason, which I totally agree with, if as a translator I can agree with, that such an institution as the National Academy of Music of Ukraine should bear a name significant for Ukrainian musical culture. Andruchovich doesn't give us the exact name, so we have to think. It might be the name of a musical activist. Well, it might be Leontovich, for example, the genius of the Carol of the Bells, while the whole world is singing around Christmas. Well, it is quite obvious that re-evaluation, reconsideration of Russian culture from the vantage point of its aggression, of the state's aggression, is one of the keynotes of the collection of the essays that we translated. Thus, Olena Stashkina, another author we translated, in her war diary, well, the 5th week of long February, discusses the notion of the little man as the alpha and omega of the so-called great Russian culture. So in Russian, it sounds like маленький человек. And I remember very often in the movies, I have this image of a gray, covered, voiceless man who shrugs his shoulders, well, as if buries his head in his body and spreads his arms, saying, I'm just a little man. Nothing depends on me. So I'm nothing. So, well, I'm not guilty of anything. And the author makes a reference to Ivan Turgenev's story, Mumu. I remember being a schoolgirl, so well, we read, of course, this story, and I remember that all our feelings and our support were with the protagonist of the story. So Gerasim, huge, bulky serf, deaf and mute. So he, well, really was suffering, but then his life of poverty was brought into sharp relief by his connection with the dog that he saved by the name of Mumu. But at one point, his late lady, well, gives him an order to drown this dog. And I remember back in school, so this lady, landlady, she was the embodiment of evil. And poor Gerasim, so he was the victim, huge, poor Gerasim, he was the victim. And Mumu, the Mumu was voiceless. So you see, the first quote is from Turgenev's Mumu. The powerful mute Gerasim humbly drowns the only soul who loves him. He looks into the eyes of his dog and throws a rope with a stone around its neck. He kills it, betrays it. He could have sold it or given it away. He could have tied it up in the woods and visited it every day, fed it and loved it. But Gerasim is a little man. He is too weak to resist the circumstances, but strong enough to kill. Another reference Stashkin makes to Rodion Raskolnikov, the protagonist of Fyodor Dostoevsky novel Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov is an impoverished student who murders two stepsisters with an axe, just to test out his theory of Superman, for whom the laws of God and society do not apply. The trembling creature Raskolnikov tests his power through murder. He's curious. He's a little man who believes that to become great means destroying another. And Stashkina goes on to say that the little man is an unknown soldier, a nameless hero, a missing warrior. They are innumerable. They have no name. They are merged into a single body of a machine that either devours or kills. So despite an apparent diversity of stylistic expression and recognition of the authors whose essays were selected for this collection, all of them share one idea, whether you like it or not, that this is not a one-man's war. That everyone who chooses to be silent shares responsibility for the blood and tears, for the destroyed cities, for raped women and murdered children. And this silent he or she is the metastasis of Putin. In his essay, you'll here have an excerpt from it. Andrei Bodnar, so the name of the essay is Complete Dissolution, addresses the eternal character of Putinism as a sanctified, legitimate methodology of political behavior, stating that Putinism appeared before Putin was even born, sprouting from historical Russia, which supposedly waged only just wars. The author describes his experience of seeing hundreds of videos in which people in Russia were stopped in the street and they responded to questions on the state policy. And he writes that the interesting thing is not that 80% of them strongly supports their president and his policy, but when stopped while walking, they get rid of their private essence within seconds, and they assume the guise of a person owned by the state, devoid of personal features. They seem to instantly put on the invisible uniform of a servant man and deny their own individuality. And probably the utmost expression of this dissolution, I think it's devastating, well, when a Russian mother who is given the star of a Russian hero, so here you see at the end of the quote, for her paratrooper son killed in Ukraine, finds it difficult to hold back tears. She eventually starts to cry because she is, after all, a mother. No Putin can do anything about that. And so crying, which is supposedly a frank human emotion that belongs to you only here and now, turns into a symbol of faith. I'm proud of our Vladimir Vladimirovich, the mother says through tears. Well, it is obvious that the classical we-they dichotomy is particularly prominent in this kind of writing. So who are they? They are little Putins. Who are we? We are great Ukrainians supported by the great democratic world. But despite being great and admired and worshipped, we're also susceptible to weaknesses. And I think that Olena Stashkina, whose name I have already mentioned, provides the most explicit transcript of the emotional state of Ukrainians, which is ranging from unfathomable grief of mothers who have lost their children, hatred towards Russian soldiers, which acquires such, well, every day a different taste. Sometimes it is that of concrete and ashes, to the peace of mind, just like the sign on the billboards, Ministry of Defense 450, which in the language of military means everything is fine, everything is calm. But in between, there are multiple shades of all human emotions. including the survivor's guilt, just like in the first part of the quote. All my friends and acquaintances often, to be honest, constantly talk about the feeling of deep shame. They are ashamed to be alive when our people are dying, to eat when they're starving, ashamed to want something trivial when so many couldn't even think to want it. Or another emotion is the anger at those Ukrainians who voted for a wrong candidate. On such days, or better two, so if one of them passes without massive bombing attacks on civilians, with small victory in several directions at once, we immediately become political opponents. On bright days, which the sun of victory seems to be, we know for sure that those who are against us voted for the wrong people in an air raid in the moment of sorrow from the east, from the south, sorrow that is now everywhere. Rage instantly returns along with solidarity. Rage brings. We are fighting here for Ukraine. Well, and actually, this brings us to another project that we completed last year that we have already mentioned, well, at the beginning of our talk. So, namely, a book by Ukrainian journalist Sergei Rudenko. Well, I remember our book launch event in State College, and I started my talk with a joke, which I might repeat now. So, you know that years before the war started, there was a popular joke in which a Ukrainian guy and his Russian counterpart were bragging about their country being a true democracy. Well, the Ukrainian guy says, Ukraine is a true democracy. We enjoy freedom of speech. For example, I can go to Maidan Nezalezhnosti, this is our central square, the Independence Square, criticize our president and get away with it. So the Russian counterpart replies, well, I can also go to the Russian square in Moscow, criticize your president and get away with that. Well, I would say that this book is a proof of Ukraine being a true democracy. Sure enough, it presents a largely positive portrait of our president, but probably far more critical than most in the West have encountered so far. Well, as a matter of fact, the original title was Zelensky, well, Bez Hrymu, so Zelensky without actress grease paint. But publishers, well, for some reason, probably to attract more readers, well, and with the author's consent, went for Zelensky a biography. And I think that publisher's decision has paid off because I think that the book is a bestseller. Well, like a coffee table book at least, right? So, and there have been lots of reviews of the book, and in one of them, it seems to be in Washington Post, the journalist aptly states that it is more a biography of presidency than that of the president. And well, I do agree with this statement, and moreover, I think that it's my personal belief that as a president of the new, awakened and unified Ukraine, Zelensky was born on the 24th of February, 2022. However, Rudenko does spend some time, of course, on biographical moments of his subject's life. So the reader does learn that Volodymyr Zelensky grew up in an industrial city, Kryvyi Rih, that he spent his early years in a small Mongolian town where his father was in charge of a mining and processing plant, that he was quite popular at school, that he studied law at university, but actually never worked as a lawyer, that after his graduation, he set up an improvisational team with his school friends and came to national prominence as Kvartal 95. So we learn how he met his wife, an architect by education, and actually who ended up being an architect of his life. Well, we also learn how he became not only a famous comedian, but also an actor. About the TV show, quite a popular TV show, The Servant of the People, where he played history teacher, Vasil Kolomborodko, who ends up being the head of state. So as they say, it's something like a postmodernism joke. When fiction becomes reality, this is what happens. But again, the vast majority of facts enlightened in the book take place between 2018 and 2022. The book is not organized chronologically, just like I mentioned. Well, it consists of 38 episodes, and it's an uneven account of the Ukrainian president's 3 years in power, with some flashbacks into the past. But even with all this jumping into the past and into the present, certain truths emerge about Ukrainian politics and our president. Well, first of all, that Ukraine has long been plagued by corruption and nepotism, that politicians have promised to do better, but they ended up getting to the status quo. And what is most important, that Russia, in threatening Ukraine's sovereignty, has managed to unite Ukrainians and turn a floundering president into a world's most admired leader. I think you also have heard this joke, well, of Americans saying that finally Americans have the president they all admire. This is Volodymyr Zelensky. So, like I said, that some reviewers, they criticize this lack of chronology, which is not in line with the biography genre. But I think that this nonlinear description of events allows the author to present time as a multi-layered category, which is abundant in parallel butterfly effects, happening simultaneously and ending up causing breathtaking consequences. Well, for example, well, it seems to me that was episode 9. So, well, this starts with the description of, well, the early years of Volodymyr Zelensky and lots of butterfly effects, and namely how his past paths with the president, the traitor, Viktor Yanukovych, who abandoned Ukraine in 2014, how their paths crossed. So I'm going to read it. So just some excerpts. On January 25, 1978, a boy named Volodymyr was born into the family of Alexander and Rima Zelensky in Kryvyi Rih. At the same time, in 1978, the Soviet Union continued to actively explore space. De facto, 1978 would be the beginning of Yanukovych's career, when someone's powerful hand helped Yanukovych clear his criminal record, paving his way to power. 32 years later, Yanukovych, rehabilitated in 1978, would meet Volodymyr Zelensky, born in 1978. This happened on July 10, 2010. On that day, the southern coast of Crimea was paralyzed, literally. Guests were rushing to the Zorya State Dacha, summer residence number 11 in the town of Foros, to attend Yanukovych's 60th birthday party. Zelensky, with Kvartal 95, was among the actors entertaining Yanukovych's guests. 4 years later, Yanukovych would flee to Russia. 9 years later, the man who entertained Viktor Yanukovych and his guests in Foros would become the 6th president of Ukraine. The last time the paths of Zelensky and Yanukovych crossed was in March 2022, when the war between Russia and Ukraine was already in full swing. Yanukovych, whom Putin planned to return to reign in Kiev, addressed Zelensky publicly and advised him to surrender, to stop the bloodshed at all costs and reach a peace agreement. The West will be grateful to you for this. Zelensky ignored this appeal. The absence of response was his most eloquent answer to Yanukovych, as well as the fact that, unlike Yanukovych, he didn't abandon Ukraine at a difficult time for the country. So what makes the book especially appealing to me is that it is about miraculous transformations. It is about an overnight transformation of a man from a sharp-witted TV star, the voice of Paddington Bear, to stumbling president, and to nearly universally admired wartime hero, who when offered evacuation by US government, apparently replied, "I need ammunition, not a right," who is often compared to Churchill. And much like Churchill, one wonders how Ukraine will judge him after the war. But this is not what we're going to speak about now, and probably what will happen after. So we don't know, Michael. What do you think? What may happen after? In terms of interpretation of Ukrainian culture. Yeah.
Well, are you asking me if?
Yes, yeah. Well, or whatever, maybe you would, yeah.
I'm
Yes.
not a soothsayer, so I don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine, although I am sure of victory, whatever that looks like for Ukraine, because the difference is Ukrainians are fighting for their homeland. They're fighting for their existence, their right to be. What are the Russian troops fighting for? Stealing dishwashers, stealing microwave ovens, paid mercenaries. They're not fighting for, they are fighting for an idea, but a stupid idea of Putin's notion of a restoration of the old Russian and Soviet empires. So, I mean, it's going to be a long task, a long, difficult road for the recovery because of all of the damage of the over 7 million Ukrainians who have left. But, and you know, you hear from your family, I hear from my friends what's going on. This has a tremendous amount of stress. It's a very traumatic situation. Air raid warnings every day, sometimes for 2 hours at a time. So living under those conditions is really, really difficult. But I know Ukrainian culture will survive and continue and thrive. There are great authors who are writing every day about what's happening. There are great authors who are being born now. I foresee a really good future for Ukrainian culture in the world, just because so many people in the world are much more open to Ukrainian culture. Before, I know when I was growing up, when somebody asked me, well, what's, ethnicity was my name. And I said, I'm Ukrainian. And their answer to me would be, oh, you're Russian. And I said, no, I'm Ukrainian. And well, what's that? And people just would not understand, wouldn't have a clue. So, and one very curious thing about a lot of these writers who are writing, like Olena Styashkina, whom Alla quoted several times, she was originally an exclusively Russian writer. She has consciously switched to writing only in Ukrainian. There are many other really prominent authors who consciously switched, mostly from Eastern Ukraine or the Odessa area, who consciously switched to writing in Ukrainian. So, 91% of the people supports President Zelensky, and I'm sure that statues will go up to him, later. That's not something to talk about now, but he has done an admirable job of really gathering support for Ukraine during this difficult time, and all the countries of Europe, including Spain, which has opened up its borders to help Ukrainian refugees. And I know Allah has personally helped several of them. And we raise money for Ukrainian refugees here. We had a concert here and raised $8,500, to help the town of Nizhyn buy equipment for its maternity hospital, equipment that was destroyed by the Russian invasion. So I don't know, is that enough of an answer, Alla?
Yes, yeah, perfect answer, Michael, yeah. So, well, I think that at this point, we would be happy to answer your questions, dear colleagues and friends.
Does anyone have any questions? Natalia, please.
Dear Alla, dear Mike, thank you for your great presentation. What do you think, question from Kiev, how do you feel this growing interest to Ukrainian culture? in your translations, in offers of the job, do you have more books to translate? Do you have more lectures to present? Do you have more questions from your neighbors to answer? Because we understand that culture, it's our life, it's a great world, but still the news, the TV news always take first place. Where is this place of literature? How do you feel personally in your translations job?
Well, in general, throughout the world, fewer people are reading. Our students at my university, they don't read very much. And we've even had to shorten even a survey of Russian literature class that we teach. We can no longer teach War and Peace because, and it's because it's too long. The students won't read it. They will rebel. They'll drop the course. They'll take a class that has less reading. It's what I want to see beyond literature is one thing, and I think Ukrainians have made great strides in that. And it's fantastic that one of the top 5 presses in the world is publishing this book of essays, and also, and it's the essays are being published in an initial print run of 20,000 copies. That's a large print run by a major press. And the same thing with this other book that I, helped translate, this Writing from Ukraine, also published by the same publisher, Penguin Publishers. And those are all good signs. We want to see more large publishers deal with not just Ukrainian literature, but literatures of quote unquote smaller, countries throughout the world. I'm sure, and I know that there are, Serbian, Croatian, Polish, Czech, Slovak, whatever, nationality you can think of. I'm sure there are wonderful works that are being written in those languages. And so there's more of an openness. One really good sign I saw, one of the most popular shows in the United States is called NCIS. It's been on for 20 years and has been the #1 show in the United States. For the first time in my lifetime, I heard the word vareniki on the show. And it was amazing to hear that. And I want to see, instead of, look, I personally don't have anything against, Russian culture. That's actually my main specialty is Russian culture. I got into Ukrainian culture more and more over the course of my career, but I wrote my dissertation and 2 books on Marina Tsvetaeva. I wrote my master's thesis on Pushkin. So aesthetically, there's much to be admired. But, if I look at, somebody like Alexander Blok or Anna Akhmatova, but I can also look at Lina Kostenko and say, this is a poet who is just as good from Ukrainian culture, or Pavlo Tychina, a poet just as good as T.S. Eliot or Lorca, or many of his contemporaries, a brilliant poet that the world didn't know about before, but hopefully knows more and more about. So I see, good signs. I would like to see more Ukrainian characters in American TV shows and world TV shows, and we don't want to see them always being the guys who are the bandits, the bad guys. We want to see them as positive characters. So I think that is a next step. They invited Lyuba Yakimchuk, a Ukrainian poet whom I know very well. She's fantastic, a poet who wrote Apricots from Donbass. It was translated into English. And she read her poem at the Academy Awards 2 years ago. I'm sorry, not the Academy Awards, but the Grammy Awards 2 years ago. So that's a national audience, and in the US and the world for that matter. So the visibility of Ukrainians. You're going to have much more visibility of Ukrainians because of all the people who are temporarily living. Even before the war, there were 1 million Ukrainian women who were working in the caregiver industry in Italy. And so that has increased in terms of numbers. And the more people meet Ukrainians, the more they will have a positive image of them, because I think the Ukrainians do present themselves well. And Ukrainians are a part of Europe. They're not a part of this wild, whatever Russia calls itself. There's a line from Alexander Blok from his Skifi, Азиаты мы с раскосыми глазами. So what is Russia? Russia has to decide whether it's part of Europe, the civilized world, or part of these wild tribes. And it has to make that decision. And it seems to be, unfortunately, making this decision the wrong way.
Yeah, Michael, I completely agree with you. And just, a few words to add. Well, I do agree that publishers are great trendsetters, and we can witness now big interest, really big interest in publishing the works by Ukrainian writers. And the fact that we were contacted by probably most famous publishing houses in the world, it's really a sign so that there is a great interest. And actually we haven't been without work, right, Michael? So right after finishing our project on Volodymyr Zelensky, so we started working on the essays. And if in the beginning we had one number, so let's say 9, but then we ended up translating 4 more. So I'm not sure how many essays will be included in the final project, right? And
I think 28.
Oh, you see, so I just lost. Yes,
and the book is called Ukraine 22. They have a title.
That's it. Yeah, that's right. Okay. And since then, we have given at least 5 or 6 talks, presentations on Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian literature, and even on a smaller scale, I must say that quite a few friends of mine from different countries, they ask me what I can recommend. Can I recommend something to read in translation? And one of my new friends from my Catalan class, the other week, she asked me for this recommendation, and I think that I'm going to bring her Yuri Vinnichuk. Another friend of mine asked where he can buy Sergei Rudenko-Zelensky. So just on the wide scale and small scale, I can see this interest. And even the fact that we're here now, this international event, Ukraine, United States, and Spain, I think is also a sign of interest, big interest.
One thing I would like to see more of is in academia, where everything has been skewed, and for obvious reasons, from the Sputnik in 1958, the US government and many governments in the world put a lot of money into Russian studies. But Russian was considered the lingua franca of the Soviet Union, so that's where all of the money went. And so, that has remained that way till now. And but I do see departments of Slavic languages and even Russian who are opening up to having Ukrainian language taught, to have Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian literature courses taught. So that has to be opened up more. And I think, and not just for Ukrainian, but these other languages of less discussed. Let's put it that way. The people don't know much about a lot of these other countries that were in the former Eastern Bloc, or even Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, the Stans, and Georgia, Armenia, the Baltic states, all of those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you all, and not just for participating in this lecture, but for what you're doing for the dissemination of Ukrainian cultural products. That's a huge job, and we really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and for watching us on Facebook as well. So I hope it's not the last conversation, and I'm really grateful to all of you for doing it. together with us, and we are sure that we will be looking for other ways of cooperation, just not to stop it here. So thank you, and I wish you a
Thank
nice
you.
evening.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.